There is a place in this world that, if you stand before it long enough, you begin to feel something very strange. Not fear, not peace, but a feeling as if you are standing before something that existed even before human memory. Something that does not belong to time. And even more unsettling is this. No matter how many generations have come and gone, no matter how many civilizations have risen and fallen, that place still stands there, as if nothing around it has ever touched it. But the real question is this: if that place has never changed, then what is it that changed? Prophetic History Explained welcomes you. If you love deep religious history stories filled with mystery and timeless meaning like this, do not forget to subscribe and support us so we can continue bringing you even better content in the future. Imagine a time when the earth had never known religious war, never known division in faith, never known idols, never known human hands bowing before the very things those same hands had made. A time when all of humanity knew only one God. No argument, no doubt, no other option. And at the center of that world, there was not a great city, not a palace, not an empire, but a house. A house with no glittering gold or silver, no fortified walls, no guards standing around it. And yet people from every direction willingly turned toward it. They came not for power, not for profit, but for one reason only: worship. That was the Kaaba. More than 1,000 years ago, a question was asked, and the answer still echoes today. One of the companions asked the Messenger of Allah, which place of worship was established first on earth? And then the answer came immediately, without hesitation: Masjid al-Haram. Then came the next question. And after that, the answer: Masjid al-Aqsa. And the gap between the two was only 40 years. What does that mean? It means that from the very earliest days of humanity, before history was ever written down, before civilizations began raising their own great structures, there was already a place established for one purpose alone: to connect human beings to their Creator. But who built it first? This is where history grows quiet and tradition begins to whisper. Some early scholars said that the angels themselves laid the first stones, raising this house directly beneath another house in heaven, where thousands of angels worship each day. A reflection between heaven and earth, an axis joining two worlds. But most scholars lean towards something else, something closer to us, yet even more chilling to reflect on. The first one to lay the foundation of that house was Adam. Pause for a moment and imagine that. The first human being created, the first given a soul, the first to live in paradise, then sent down to earth. A place completely unfamiliar. No human guidance, no history to rely on, no sign of life as he had once known it. And the first thing he did was not to build shelter, not to search for food, not to make life easier. It was to establish a place of worship. As if from the very first moment human feet touched the earth, the purpose of existence had already been carved into the foundation of this world. The Kaaba was never just a structure. It was never just a building. It was a declaration that in the middle of a planet that had never heard prayer, there was already a place where heaven and earth met. For many generations after that, humanity kept to that truth. They lived with one belief. They turned toward one place. They bowed to one God. No idols, no middlemen, no division. Imagine a world like that. A world where no one argued about faith. No one fought over religion. No one shaped gods with their own hands and then bowed before them. A world where the Kaaba was not only the geographical center, but the center of the human heart. But then something began to change. Not in the Kaaba, in people. And when that happened, the consequences did not stop at belief. They spread, they corroded, and in the end, they erased even the holiest things from the surface of the world. And the question is, how could a place established by the very first human being disappear from the sight of humanity? And if it once disappeared, what brought it back? The answer is not as simple as you may think. At first, the change did not come like a storm. It did not arrive all at once, destroying everything in a single moment. It came very slowly, almost too quietly to notice. Like a tiny crack in a wall that appears in a place everyone assumes is solid. No one pays attention. No one thinks it is dangerous. But over time, that crack spreads, and one day the whole wall collapses. That is how human faith collapsed. There was no single day when humanity woke up and chose to abandon Tawhid. There was no one moment when they all turned their backs on the Creator. Everything began with very small things, thoughts that seemed harmless, actions that looked temporary. Yet those were the very things that opened a door that became almost impossible to close once crossed. At first, people still remembered the righteous ones who lived before them, those of strong faith, those who had once stood at that sacred place and bowed before Allah. They remembered them, respected them, and told their stories. Then they wanted to preserve that memory longer. So they began making images, symbols, markers to remember, not to worship, only to remember. But history follows a ruthless law. What begins as remembrance can very easily become worship. The next generation looked at those symbols and no longer understood the original purpose. They no longer knew these had once been ordinary human beings. To them, those images became something greater, something that could hear, could help, or could give. And then, for the first time in human history, shirk appeared, not as a rebellion, not as open defiance, but as a quiet shift, subtle yet absolute. In that world, Nu appeared. He did not come with power. He did not come with armies. He did not begin with overwhelming miracles. He came with words, with patience, with a call back to what people had once known clearly. A call that lasted not 1 year, not 10 years, but 950 years. Pause for 1 second and think about that number. Nearly a millennium. One man standing in the middle of a society sliding deeper into error, day after day, year after year, generation after generation, still repeating the same message. Return to Allah. Leave behind the things your own hands have made. And what was the result? Only a very small number believed. Most turned away, not because they did not understand, but because they did not want to change. And when a society reaches the point where the truth has been spoken clearly enough, long enough, patiently enough, and is still rejected, what happens then? The answer no longer comes from human beings. It comes from Allah. The sky began to change. The earth began to shift. What had once been stable became strange. Then the door of punishment opened. The great flood was not merely heavy rain. It was not an ordinary natural disaster. It was an event that engulfed the whole world. Water burst forth from the earth. Water poured down from the sky. There was nowhere left to flee. No safe land remained. Everything sank. Homes, memories, people, civilizations. And with all of that, something else disappeared too. The place that had once been the center of Tawhid, the house once raised by Adam, the Kaaba. No one could see it anymore. No one knew exactly where it was. No clear trace remained on the face of the earth. It was not destroyed in the ordinary sense. It was not smashed by human hands. It was removed from sight as if it had never existed. But that was not really the truth. It was still there, buried beneath layers of red sand, hidden beneath what remained of a vanished world. silent, no longer circled by worshippers, no longer filled with prayer, no longer marked by the footsteps of pilgrims. Only the foundation remained, waiting. This is the point where the story becomes difficult for many people to understand. Why would a sacred place like that be allowed to disappear? Why would Allah allow His house to be erased from the surface of the world? The answer is not in the house. It is in people. When the heart no longer turns toward Tawhid, then even the center of Tawhid no longer holds meaning. The Kaaba did not disappear because it was weak. It disappeared because humanity was no longer worthy of seeing it. And perhaps the most striking thing to reflect on is this. The Kaaba never moved from its place. It was human beings who moved away from it. For centuries after that, the place lay silent beneath the sand. No one knew. No one searched. No one remembered. Like a secret buried in the middle of the world. But its story was not over. Because what is buried by forgetfulness is not always buried to be lost. Sometimes it is buried only to wait for the right moment to rise again. There are commands from Allah that, to the human mind alone, seem almost impossible to understand. Not because they lack meaning, but because they go far beyond what human beings normally call reasonable. And one of those commands was given to a man whom history remembers as the intimate friend of Allah. Ibrahim was commanded to take his wife, Hajar, and their nursing infant, Ismail, to a place where no human being would ever choose to stay. No water, no trees, no life. Only bare mountains surrounding a valley so dry, it seemed the earth itself had been abandoned. Then he left them there. Not because he wanted to, but because he was commanded to. Hajar watched every step Ibrahim took as he turned and walked away. She called out. He did not answer. She asked again. He remained silent. That silence was not heartlessness. It was complete submission. But to a wife and a mother left behind in a place with no sign of life, that silence was the hardest thing of all to bear. Until she asked one question, a question that changed everything. Is this from Allah? And when the answer was yes, all fear disappeared. Then He will not abandon us. That was not self-comfort. That was faith. In the days that followed, no miracle appeared right away. The water ran out. The heat grew harsher. The cry of a thirsty infant was not just a sound. It was a wound in the heart. And Hajar could not stand still. She ran, from one hill to the other, from Safa to Marwa. Not once, not twice, but 7 times. Each run carried hope, then disappointment. Each look toward the horizon carried expectation, then emptiness. But there was one thing she did not do. She did not lose hope in Allah. And at the moment when a human being had done everything humanly possible, the miracle appeared. A strike upon the ground, and from a place where there had been no life, water burst forth. Not just water. Zamzam, a spring that did not merely quench the thirst of one child, but changed the destiny of an entire region. A forgotten valley became a place of life. Birds arrived, people noticed, caravans began to stop, and from an empty valley, a community was born. But the story did not end there. Years later, when Ismail had grown, Ibrahim returned. But this time he did not come in order to leave. He came with another command, not to abandon, but to rebuild. Allah showed him the place where the old foundation had once stood, the place buried beneath sand and time, the place forgotten by the world, but never forgotten by Allah. Stone by stone, the structure was raised, not by an architect, not by a team of builders, but by a father and a son whose hearts were fully surrendered. Each stone was not only material, it was prayer, it was humility, It was the awareness that this building did not belong to them. It belonged to Allah. Our Lord, accept this from us. That was the prayer they repeated, not because they doubted, but because they knew that no matter how correct an action may seem, if Allah does not accept it, it has no value. When the walls rose too high for Ibrahim to reach, a stone was placed for him to stand on, a trace that remains to this day, not to glorify a human being, but to remind the world of submission. And then, when the building was complete, another command came. Perhaps one of the strangest commands of all: call mankind to pilgrimage. Ibrahim stood in a valley that was not yet the center of the world. There was no crowd, and no audience, no means of broadcasting any message. But he called anyway. And the miracle was not in the volume of his voice. It was in how that call was carried. According to what early scholars related, that call did not stop in the air. It moved through time. It reached souls not yet born. And every one of them answered, "Here we are, O Allah." And they are still coming, millions every year, from every corner of the earth, not because they were invited by human beings, but because they are answering a call that was inscribed into their very existence before they were ever born. The Kaaba was rebuilt, not merely as a structure, but as a reminder that even if people forget, even if time buries, even if history fades, whatever is built for Allah will one day be restored. And this time, it was no longer just a place. It became a promise. Allah's promise that there would always be a center to which human beings could return, no matter how far they had gone. At first, they did not destroy it. They did not stand before the Kaaba intending to betray or insult it. They still protected it, still welcomed pilgrims, still maintained the rights established by Ibrahim. Outwardly, everything seemed unchanged. But true corruption never begins in action. It begins in the heart. As time passed and generations replaced one another, the memory of the real meaning of the Kaaba grew faint, not because they had never known it, but because they no longer felt it. What once made them tremble, bow, and feel small before the presence of Allah became familiar. And when the sacred becomes familiar, it begins to lose its sacredness. That is how Ibrahim changed. They did not wake up one day and decide to do wrong. They simply began allowing small things, a little carelessness, a little disrespect, a little disregard. Then all of those little things gathered together until nothing remained of the reverence that had once been there. Acts that no one would have dared even imagine in earlier times began to appear. The place that had once been the center of worship was turned into a place serving personal purposes. The boundaries Ibrahim had set were crossed, not once, but many times, not by one person, but by an entire community that had lost its sense of what was sacred. This is the point where the story becomes heavier than any mysterious detail. Because nothing is more frightening than human beings losing reverence for what is sacred while still imagining they are doing what is right. And when that happens, the consequence does not come immediately. It accumulates. It waits. Until it reaches a limit human beings cannot see, but Allah can. Another tribe had been watching all of it. They saw the corruption. They saw the abuse. They saw what had been happening around the Kaaba, and they could no longer accept it. In the end, conflict erupted, not over power, not over territory, but over something deeper, the right to protect a sacred place that had been betrayed. War broke out, fierce, unforgiving. And Ibrahim, the very people once entrusted with the amana of protecting the Kaaba, were defeated, driven out from the place they had overseen for centuries. But before leaving, They did something history never forgot. They did not destroy the Kaaba. They did something more subtle. They buried its source of life. The well of Zamzam, the spring that had once saved Hajar and Ismail, the spring that had turned a dead valley into a living center, was covered over, hidden, erased from sight. No trace, no visible path to it, as if it had never existed. But they did not stop there. The treasures that had been given to the Kaaba across generations, gold, silver, gifts from pilgrims, were gathered together, then buried, not to protect them, but to strip them away. If they could no longer have Mecca, then Mecca should not remain as it once was. That was not only revenge, it was despair turning into sabotage, a final attempt to control something they had long since lost the right to control. Then they left, leaving behind a valley with no visible source of water, a city with a buried secret, a Kaaba still standing, but no longer as before. And it was during this period that stories began to spread. Stories of a creature no one dared confront, a giant serpent, black as night, white underneath like light, a head like a ram, teeth showing, eyes no one could bear to look into directly. People said it appeared inside the Kaaba, that it coiled itself around the walls, that anyone who tried to approach had to retreat in fear. No one dared step inside. No one dared touch it. But here we need to pause, because not everything preserved in history carries the same level of authenticity. These reports about the serpent appear in early historical writings, but they do not come with chains of transmission as strong as authentic hadith. Some scholars accepted them as part of history. Others saw them as additions that entered later. And some viewed them as influences from outside traditions. So, what is the truth? Perhaps it was real. Perhaps it was symbolic. Perhaps it was only the way people tried to explain something they could not understand. But one thing does not change. Whether there was a serpent or not, no one could approach the Kaaba in that period the way they once had. And the deeper thing to reflect on is this. Even if there had been no serpent at all, the result would have been the same. The house of Allah was no longer open to those who had lost reverence for it. Perhaps the most frightening thing was not a creature standing guard. Perhaps it was that human beings were being kept back by what they themselves had become. And while the Kaaba still stood there, unmoving, silent, history continued moving around it, waiting for another moment, another turning point, another purification. Some mistakes do not come from ignorance. They come from trusting the wrong person. Not everyone who brings change is an enemy. Sometimes the person who opens the door to corruption is the very one most loved, most respected, and most listened to. And that is exactly how darkness returned to Mecca. Umar ibn Luhay was not a tyrant. He did not force people with violence. On the contrary, he was a beloved leader, generous, influential, respected, and most importantly, trusted. That is why when he changed, an entire society changed with him. Everything did not begin with statues. It began with an idea, a new way of thinking, a new interpretation of worship, something that sounded harmless, yet carried a deep distortion inside it. He brought back from the region of Sham something Mecca had not known in that way before. Idols to be worshipped. One idol was placed inside the Kaaba itself, not outside, not in some distant corner, but right inside the house that had been established for the worship of Allah alone. And then nothing held back the slide any longer. One idol became many. One idea became a system. Not just one group, but each tribe began bringing its own god. In the end, the number reached 360. 360 idols around the Kaaba. The place that had once been the center of pure Tawhid had now become the center of fragmentation. And the most frightening part was that they did not think they were wrong. They still performed pilgrimage, still circled the Kaaba, still believed they were worshiping Allah. But in their words, and in their rites, in their hearts, something had become mixed in. A mixture that at first seemed small, but was enough to change the meaning of everything. That is how shirk not only entered, but took root. Time passed. Generations changed. Then an event came that placed the Kaaba before another turning point. A major flood swept through Mecca. Water rushed down from the surrounding mountains and struck the ancient walls. The Kaaba, a structure that had stood through generations, began to crack. Stones shifted. The building was no longer safe. Quraysh had to make a decision. They would tear it down and rebuild it. But before doing so, they established a principle, one that brought the whole community into silence. Not a single unlawful coin was to be used in rebuilding the Kaaba. No money from usury, no money from injustice, and no money from corrupt sources. Only what was pure was allowed to touch the house of Allah. They began gathering wealth, counting, sorting. Then they discovered a painful truth. The lawful money was not enough. That forced them into a difficult decision. They would rebuild the Kaaba, but smaller. Part of the original foundation would remain outside. Part of the legacy of Ibrahim would no longer be included within the new structure. That was the consequence of a society whose wealth was no longer mostly pure. But even when they intended to repair it, they still felt held back. When they moved near the Kaaba to begin dismantling it, reports say that a giant serpent appeared, coiled around the walls, preventing anyone from getting close. Once again, fear returned. But just as before, and these reports are not of the strongest level of authenticity. They are preserved in historical sources, but do not rise to the standard of the most reliable hadith. Some accepted them, some doubted them, some simply said Allah knows best. And perhaps that is the soundest approach, because whether there was a serpent or not, what truly matters is this: people felt prevented. In the end, they prayed. They asked permission. They approached with the intention of repair, not destruction. And when nothing happened, they continued. Until they reached the old foundation, the stones from the time of Ibrahim, stones that had rested beneath the earth for centuries. When they tried to move them, some reports say that flashes of light appeared and the earth shook as if warning them. So they stopped. Not because they fully understood, but because they knew that some limits are not meant to be crossed. Then the Kaaba was rebuilt. Smaller, different, but still standing. Until the most important moment in its history arrived. Prophet Muhammad returned to Mecca, not as an exile, but as the bearer of truth, not in pride, but in humility. When he entered the Kaaba, the 360 idols were still there, symbols of an age of deviation, traces of all that human beings had added. Then one by one, they were broken. Truth has come, and falsehood has vanished. There was no great war, no revenge, no bloodshed like people once imagined, only purification. Then a man once mocked and tortured on that very land was called forward. Bilal. He climbed the Kaaba, a place once reserved for those considered chosen, and he gave the call, Allahu Akbar. And that sound was not only the Adhan, it was the return of Tawhid, the return of the original purpose, the return of a promise first laid down in the time of Adam. So what about the serpent? Perhaps it existed, perhaps it never did. Perhaps it was only a symbol of protection. But after everything that happened, one truth remains undeniable. The Kaaba never truly needed a creature to protect it. Not a serpent, not human beings, not armies. Only Allah. And perhaps that is what this entire story has always been leading us toward. The deepest lesson in this story is this: corruption does not begin with a giant leap. It begins with very small changes inside the heart. And just as the Kaaba was restored not through force, but through the submission of Ibrahim, the patience of Hajar, and the guidance of Prophet Muhammad, the path back for each of us also begins with very small things. By checking our intentions again, by putting our priorities back in their proper order, by asking ourselves what is truly occupying the center of our hearts. And if there is one thing this story leaves behind with certainty, it is this: Allah does not need us to protect His religion, but we need to return to Him in order to save ourselves. If you want to understand meaningful religious history stories like this more deeply and discover the lessons hidden inside details that many people never notice, join the Prophetic History Explained community so we can continue exploring valuable knowledge together. Knowledge that helps us look back at the past in order to understand the present more clearly and orient the future. And do not forget to subscribe and support us so we can continue bringing you content that is deep, high quality, and able to touch the heart in the videos ahead.